Hello and welcome to Microbes at Work from the experts at JGL Solutions. I'm your host, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the program. Now, joining me today to give us some insights into the way JGL's products work from a customer perspective is Jacob McLean, Northeast Oklahoma Area Manager for JGL Solutions. Jacob, welcome on the program. Thanks for joining me, man.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Jacob, you work for JGL now, but it wasn't so long ago that you were on the other side of things, right? The customer side. So give us some of the history there and what your interactions were like when you worked with JGL.
Okay, a little bit of my professional history is I came from an oil and gas family. My father was in it at a very young age, so that's kind of how I got exposed to it. And so I started working for a coal bed methane company in southeast Kansas. And so I learned a lot going up through the ranks professionally. And our neighbor actually started using JGL's microbial products in their saltwater systems. And so a lot of myself and my colleagues, we were under the assumption, man, what is this new thing coming in? It's snake oil. I doubt it works. You know, so we watched them do it, and they were having good success, and they were starting to, pull away from the traditional chemical programs. And so we said, man, they might really have something here. So my management team decided to give JGL and Bill a couple of sites. And so I was allowed to watch the product work under someone else's budget per se and let them spend the money. And we were able to see real world results by having filters and things that didn't have to go to be serviced as regularly. And some real world stuff that was really good, and I have used that product professionally as I've transitioned through my career.
That's incredible. So give us just an overview of what JGL Specialties are and what you can provide to your clients.
Okay, so JGL Solutions provides various microbial products for varying oil field applications, from emulsion and oil water separation to paraffin to different scales, calcium carbonate, iron sulfide. We do actually do some stuff with barium. We can't remove it, but we can keep it from forming. There's several different things that we can do that traditional chemicals cannot, and one in particular is remediation of scale. Traditional chemical companies, they can keep scale from forming, but they cannot remove it. That takes a separate product via an acid, via something of that nature. So JGL's products are very unique in that they add multiple benefits, and all of this is normally blended upon the customer's individual needs on their site. So it's not like you have to buy 4 or 5 separate products. It is all custom blended to what you need per what you have going on.
So you mentioned earlier you started to see real world results. What are some of those real world results that an oil and gas company can expect to see?
Some of the real world results are you're going to see that your system, let's take a saltwater facility for instance. So we have tanks there that produce salt water, and we treat the tanks themselves via batch with a truck. And so some of the things that you're going to see, our microbes go through a small cleaning process. So if you have, let's say, iron sulfide, for instance, in the water, it's going to remediate and remove, which would mean slightly to release that in very, very fine particles. That's part of the cleanup process. So what your pumpers or your real-world field level guys will see is, for instance, Jacob, man, my filters, I was checking them once a week, and all of a sudden, I'm having to check them, once a day. They're plugging up, and everyone's thinking, man, this is bad. And so we had to train our employees on the product and say, this is part of what's going to happen, and just bear with it. And so you've got a little bit of a struggle with that, but the real world proof in the pudding is about, 8-9 months into it, they go from having to change stuff frequently to not having to check it at all. When they pull their filters out, they look as clean as when you put them out of a box and put them in. That's what I mean by that, as well as lowered injection pressures and things of that nature, and reduced acid jobs, which saves oil and gas companies operating expenses.
So Jacob, in that answer, you kind of gave a little bit of the answer to this next question, but I wanted to touch on it specifically. How long does it take to begin to see results in a typical setting?
It really varies on a lot of variables that you're particularly having. That's why when we come to a site, we sample your particular water or your particular well bore, and it varies on a lot of factors. So it's kind of a very vague answer there, but you can see, stuff as real world results as quick as, 2-3 weeks. I will say the dirtier the system, the more stuff you have, the longer it's going to take. Now you can expedite that potentially, let's say in the same scenario of saltwater system. If you have a lot of what they call tank bottoms or material in the bottom, you could go before we come in. If you clean that up, that will expedite the process and you seeing some real world results. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, these days, everyone wants things to be proven by data. They want to be able to look at the data and see that something is working or not working and make decisions based off of that. So what kind of data is given to the customer, and how can you help use that to validate your microbial program?
Okay, so some of the data we give, like I said, we get our initial samples, and that gives us the makeup of your water in particular, or your oil, what we're dealing with. And we're going to custom tailor a program to that. And then every month we're going to come back and what's called a millipore analysis, and we filter that water, we weigh that, and then it's going to give us a plugging factor, and we use that to tell, are we doing good? Do we need to curtail our program? Do we need to change something? And as always, what the customer is giving us in feedback as well. Are you having any problems? Do we need to change anything? Are you seeing anything good, bad, or indifferent? And so we have that data from inception when we start our program, and it helps validate, because sometimes results are hard to see, or if everything's going good, how can we prove it's going good? So that allows management and or executives to say, okay, well, we've got XYZ company out here. How can you prove to us that it's working, we're going the right direction?
Yeah, that's a great point. And when you were on the customer side, what were the results that you saw? I know you gave us a bit of a synopsis there at the beginning, but specifically, what were the results that you saw, and maybe can you validate that with any of the data like what you're discussing?
Yeah, so I ran a field in Northwest Louisiana. I was the operations manager. I brought JGL Solutions down there specifically to treat my salt water. And that field in particular was older. It had been, air quote, abused a little bit. It hadn't been taken care of properly. So we kind of had to start behind the 8 ball per se, just to get everything going. And so we seen those systems really clear up on a data perspective from running a lot more water once we got into it. It took us some time, but I understood that coming in because of my previous history with the microbials in Southeast Kansas, that this isn't going to be a 1 month, a 2 month deal. I'm in it for a long-term investment for the best health of my saltwater wells. In my opinion, your saltwater wells are your most important well of any lease, because without it, potentially you are shut down. And so we had data for about 5 years, I believe, in Northwest Louisiana. And we've seen some really good trends on some really tough water that traditional chemical companies in that basin were unable to handle.
Absolutely. So, Jacob, one of the things that I'm curious about is the oil and gas industry an industry that does things the way that they've always done them just because it's simply the way it's done? And is it hard to change hearts and minds and turn people onto a new idea in this industry?
In my opinion, it definitely suffers from that, and they suffer well. My father did it that way. My previous engineer I interned under did it that way, so that's the way you do it. So it takes a different mindset to say, well, I'm going to think out of the box a little bit, and let me just hear what you have to say and how your product works. It's definitely a challenge, but with proper education, I feel like you can convey that as long as the customer has an open mind.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And on that topic of education, I wonder if you could break down just the key differences and maybe advantages of going with a microbial program as opposed to a traditional chemical program.
Okay, in my opinion, the first advantage, because I come from the other side of the desk, is cost. Generally, we're about a third of what a traditional program costs via, let's say, a Baker Hughes, a Nalco Champion, something like that. So that's number one for me, because I'm real world. That's what I look at. That's what my executives look at. Secondly, it's all of the things that microbials can do for you that traditional chemicals can't. And by that I mean, in our saltwater system that I'm using, for example, if I was going to treat that the same way traditionally with chemicals, like let's say I have emulsion, let's say I have paraffin, let's say I have iron sulfide, and let's say I have calcium carbonate. That example there would take 4 to 5 different products to treat effectively. Our blends are designed specific to your needs. So if you have those 5 issues, we can curtail a blend that doesn't cost any more money per se to do it. That's just the way we design our products.
That's incredible. Well, Jacob, I think you've outlined the immense benefits of a microbial program here today on the program. I want to turn it over to you. Any closing thoughts or anything that you want to mention before we wrap up this episode today?
One thing I would like to mention is all JGL products are 100% green. They are not harmful to the environment in any way. So as far as where your other chemical companies might have containment and things like that, we would never need anything like that. Not that we treat in that way. It's all batch treated via our trucks, but that's just an important thing to note in today's day.
And Jacob, if people want to get in touch with you and ask questions or just get more information, how should they go about doing that?
The best way to reach me would probably be via email. That's at jacobmclain@jglsolutions.com. And they could also visit our website at jglsolutions.com, and there's additional contact information there.
Fantastic stuff. Jacob McLean, Northeast Oklahoma Area Manager for JGL Solutions. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you again for having me.
And everyone, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Microbes at Work from the experts at JGL Solutions. We appreciate you being along with us today. We'll be back soon with more content just like this, more thought leadership, more expertise, and more guidance just in this world of oil and gas. But until then, I've been your host today, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for joining us.